You're listening to Saturday Morning Media. And now, back to our show. The Cauldron of Hate, a story by Grant Baciocco. Chapter 4. At 4:30 p.m. the following Monday, the Blinding Skull, the Plant Lady, and the Living Lump were standing on the sidelines of one of the practice fields at Saddle River City Municipal Park. There, staring back at them, was a short, pear-shaped man with a clipboard in his hand. As he regarded the trio of supervillains standing before him, his left eyebrow raised and lowered in such a frantic manner it made it seem as if it were a living creature. Coach Templin was a first-year coach for the JYSO, Junior Youth Soccer Organization. Most of the other coaches are what you would call lifers, men and women who'd been coaching in the city for years. Coach Paul Templin was an idealistic young man still in college at Saddle River City University who had his eyes set on running for mayor in the future and saw coaching as something that looked good on a resume. As the new coach, he was saddled with the task the other coaches were too senior to be bothered with. He'd been made to sort out the uniforms on Uniform Distribution Day, he'd been made to call all the parents in their league to remind them to bring their child's waivers on the first day, and he'd been tasked with making sure that the organization's 232 soccer balls were properly inflated. He'd done all duties as assigned with a smile on his face, knowing he had to pay his dues. Now, apparently, paying his dues also meant that he had to deal with 3 supervillains as sponsors of his youth soccer team. The Blinding Skull had come with a list of questions. "What are our duties as team sponsors?" "Well," Coach Templin replied, scratching his cheek, "the sponsors are more of a support role. You help run practice by putting out cones, handing out orange slices, and monitoring the water jug. You're also responsible for chaperoning the players when we go out for milkshakes after every game." The Living Lump smiled. "Milkshakes?" "Yeah, team tradition. Win or lose, we go get milkshakes as a team." The Blinding Skull cut him off. "What are our duties when it comes to coaching? Like laying out strategies and examining opposing teams' weaknesses, that sort of thing." Coach Templin shook his head. "None. I'm the coach. I do all that." The Blinding Skull chuckled. "Well, perhaps you do not know who I am. I am the world's smartest man. You'd be a fool to pass up tapping into my incredibly peerless intellect." "I know who you are. I know who all 3 of you are. You're 3 washed-up has-been supervillains who are the laughingstock of the city. And somehow, I won the crappy luck lottery and I'm stuck with you. So now, on top of babysitting 10 6 to 8-year-olds, I have to keep an eye on you 3. Well, let me tell you, you 3 are going to show up and do as I tell you. I tell you to sit out cones, you sit out cones. I tell you to field balls, you field balls. I tell you to cut up the orange slices so that they're exactly proportionate to each other, you do it. Because if you don't, I'm not signing your little form, and you 3 can go rot in jail for the rest of forever for all I care. You understand what I'm saying?" The Blinding Skull, the Plant Lady, and the Living Lump nodded sheepishly. It had been some time since they'd been reprimanded so sharply. "Good," Coach Templin continued. "Now set out the cones. The kids will be here in 15 minutes. The 3 turned to get to work when the Blinding Skull raised a finger. Coach Templin?" The coach, who'd just been turning to open a bag of soccer balls, looked up at Skull with a scowl. Plant Lady and Lump turned around. The Blinding Skull swallowed, then continued. Sir, I was reading the JYSO sponsor bylaws, and it states that the sponsors get to choose the team name." Coach Templin wrinkled his brow again, his eyebrows performing a rumba. "Yeah?" "Well, we have a team name all picked out." Coach Templin smirked. "You do?" "We do?" Lump asked. "Yes," replied Skull with a small smile on his face. He was happy for this small victory against the overbearing coach. "This team is to be called the Saddle River City Death Rays." As the time neared 5 o'clock p.m., the Cauldron of Hate put the finishing touches on getting the soccer field ready for practice. The goals were marked with cones, a dribbling slalom was set up, and the water jug was filled with ice water. As the plant lady watched over a hydrangea plant cutting up oranges into perfectly proportional slices, the blinding skull sat on the bench next to her as the living lump tried, with no success, to bounce a soccer ball on his knee. "I don't like this coach," the blinding skull muttered. "I don't care for him much either, dear," the plant lady said, placing some orange slices into Tupperware. The blinding skull continued, "How dare he dress us down like that? Laughing stock, indeed." Lump let the ball he was playing with drop to the grass. "You want me to go pound him?" "No, Lump, no," the plant lady admonished quickly. "You pound him and the three of us will wind up behind bars. I'm afraid we've got to play by his rules." Lump frowned and picked up the ball he'd dropped. "Plant lady is right. We have to do whatever he says, or we violate the terms of our release." The blinding skull sat glaring out at Coach Templin as he stood in the middle of the field making notes on his clipboard. Suddenly, the light emanating from the blinding skull's skull grew a bit brighter. The plant lady shielded her eyes, but she knew what this meant. Skull just had an idea. "I have an idea," Skull stated. "A brilliant idea. An idea to restore honor to the name of the Cauldron of Hate in the eyes of the people of Saddle River City." "What's that?" the plant lady asked automatically, knowing whatever the plan was, there'd be no way to dissuade Skull from it. "The Saddle River City Death Race need to win the city-wide championship," said Skull matter-of-factly. He turned excited to his two cohorts. "If our team wins the championship, the city will have to take notice of us. We may not be able to bring the city to its knees via diabolical deeds, but we can crush the competition on the soccer field." The blinding skull glanced out over the parking lot. The first of several minivans were pulling in. The blinding skull excitedly hopped up, standing on the bench. "Look there, friends. Our soldiers arrive, being driven in modern-day chariots to the battlefield." He turned with glee to Lump and the plant lady. "Coach Templin doesn't want our help in coaching the kids, but we will give it to him whether he likes it or not. We shall use our vast resources, your plants, your immense strength, and my intellect to take our team to the top. Come on, friends, let's meet our infantry as they take the field. I want to get a good close-up look at the fine men and women who will battle for supremacy under the Saddle River City Death Race banner." The blinding skull hopped off the bench and strode across the field as the first side door of the first minivan slid open. The plant lady looked up at Lump and shrugged. The two followed Skull across the field to meet the children. At 5:05 p.m. that Monday night, there was a long, awkward silence on Field 3 of the Saddle River City Municipal Soccer Fields. The 7 assembled children stared at the supervillains, and the supervillains stared back. The children had, of course, heard of the Cauldron of Hate before. They had seen them on news reports, in magazines, and on websites dedicated to the heroes and villains of the world, but all that is much different than seeing them in person. The realness of gazing on the blinding skull, the plant lady, and especially the living lump standing a mere 5 feet from them was enough to put them into a shock of silence. The plant lady looked like anyone's grandmother, so her appearance was not that shocking to the children. Since the sun was still out, the blinding skull's skull wasn't too blinding, and to the children he looked like someone wearing a Halloween mask. It was the living lump that made the biggest impression on the children at first glance. Because of his immense size, the living lump was the most impressive of the three in person. The 7 children stood engulfed in Lump's shadow, which covered them completely. He was the main root of the children's silenced awe. He was especially awesome to 6-year-old Aris Bagdarian, the smallest member of the team. This was the tallest person he'd seen. Ever. And for someone who was as small as Aris was, Lump appeared even bigger than he did to the other children. However, as shocked as the kids were to see the Cauldron of Hate, the Cauldron of Hate was more shocked to see the 7 children now standing before them, especially the blinding skull. In his mind, he'd pictured 7 examples of prime physical prowess, ready to destroy any team in their path. What stood in front of them were 7 of the most out-of-shape, wimpy-looking misfits the trio had ever laid eyes upon. Skull's heart sank. His dreams of winning the city championship dashed. This ragtag group of dribblers would have an uphill battle trying to score a goal, let alone win any championships, the blinding skull thought to himself. Or at least he thought to himself. He quickly deduced by the way everyone, the kids, the coach, Lump, and Plant Lady were staring at him, he'd said it out loud. Coach Templin cleared his throat. Okay, kids, welcome to the first practice of the... He glared over at the blinding skull. Saddle River City Death Rays. I'm your coach, Coach Templin, and these are your team sponsors. The Cauldron of Hate, a skinny girl with long brown hair and thick glasses interjected. Coach Templin searched for her name. Taylor, she offered. Taylor, this is indeed the Cauldron of Hate. As your parents were informed, they're going to be the team's sponsors. They'll be helping me and the team at practice and the games. Now, I know some of you may be scared to have 3 supervillains working with us, but I'm not scared, Taylor interjected. This is the supervillain team who is so bad they can't even be bad. There's nothing to fear from them. My dad says they are nothing but a group of losers. Several other children nodded their heads. What a delightful child. Think you could get a tree to throw her across town? The blinding skull whispered to the plant lady. Shh, whispered the plant lady, and slugged him on the shoulder. Skull winced and rubbed his arm. Well, since you know who they are, why don't you introduce yourselves? We've met Taylor. Who's next? Coach Templin asked. I'm Chris, said the tallest child, who had a crazy mop of blonde hair that looked as if it had never ever seen a comb. The blinding skull regarded him carefully. He looked to be the most physically capable of the lot. Zoe, said a bookish, red-headed girl with thick glasses. Nice to meet you, she added, wiping her nose on her sleeve. The rest of the team fired off their names. Jane, Joshua, Scott. That was all of them, save for the littlest player, Aris, who still stood, frozen, staring up at the living lump. Chris looked down and nudged him with an elbow. Aris stumbled forward and shuffled towards the living lump, never once taking his eyes from the villains. He stopped about a foot away from the lump, his neck craned to keep eye contact. All eyes were on this comically mismatched duo. Aris then thrust a hand out towards Lump and held it there. My name is Aris, and I'm very pleased to meet you. The living lump was taken aback. No stranger had ever acted this kindly towards him before. He was unsure what to do. The plant lady looked up at him and then nudged him with her elbow. Shake his hand, Lump, she instructed, then quickly added, but gently. Lump extended his hand. The size difference was laughable. It looked like all of Aris's arm could fit entirely into Lump's hand. Seeing the size difference, instead of taking Aris's whole hand into his, he carefully extended his thumb and forefinger and gingerly shook the kid's hand. For the first time since his arrival, Aris smiled. Lump smiled back down at him. Then, in one swift motion, Aris took Lump by the finger and began leading him out towards the field. Come on, let's play some soccer, he said, dragging Lump behind him. The blinding skull and the plant lady were flabbergasted. The drills lasted for 45 minutes, with an orange slice and water break in the middle. The last 15 minutes was spent handing out uniforms, going over rules, and setting up the practice schedule. They had less than 1 week before their first game. At 6 p.m., the kids were excused, and the blinding skull, the plant lady, and the living lump watched with Coach Templin as the kids ran off to the parking lot and their awaiting parents. High-pitched voices bubbled over with talk of the upcoming season and the 3 supervillains who were helping out their team. The 4 of them stood and watched until the last sliding door on the last minivan was closed and the tail lights faded from view. When they were all gone, Coach Templin threw his clipboard down to the ground in disgust. This is the worst! The Cauldron of Hate were taken aback by his outburst. What's wrong? The blinding skull asked. What's wrong? Yelled the coach, a vein appearing in the center of his forehead. What's wrong? Did you see them? This is without a doubt the worst set of players in the entire world. This is the rest of the coaches giving me, the new guy, the worst of the league. I'll admit they are a little rough, the blinding skull said, but there's surely a chance with your coaching we could go all the way. Ha! Coach Templin laughed. Go all the way. If by go all the way you mean have the worst record in the history of the sport, then yes, they will go all the way. Coach Templin stomped on the clipboard, driving it deeper into the grass. Look at that kid Aris. He's what, about 3 feet tall? And they want him to play goalie? He's barely bigger than the ball. Chris is a spaz who has no control over his body. Zoe can't see 5 feet in front of her, and that's with her glasses. The only kid on this team who has any hint of natural ability is Taylor, and she's only coming here because her dad is making her. I said it before, and I'll say it again. This is the worst. I like that kid Aris. He's nice, the living lump stated sheepishly. The plant lady nodded. It was just the first practice. The both of them noticed that the Blinding Skull's head began glowing a little brighter. He was thinking. After a moment of silence punctuated by Coach Templin's fuming, the Blinding Skull spoke. Coach Templin, I understand your frustrations. This team does appear to have several challenges that would, at first glance, seem to diminish the possibilities of victory. But what if I could promise you that not only will the team play great during their first game next week, they'll win it? Coach Templin froze, counted to 10, then slowly turned to face the Blinding Skull. He cleared his throat and spoke slowly. And how will they manage that? The Blinding Skull smiled, his head getting even brighter. You just keep drilling them on the basics and leave the rest up to us sponsors. The Blinding Skull chuckled softly as Coach Templin, the Plant Lady, and the Living Lump looked at him quizzically. You've been listening to The Cauldron of Hate. To download a PDF of the chapter you just heard, visit cauldronofhate.com. The Cauldron of Hate was written by Grant Baciocco. The story was edited by Liz Brown, and the audio was edited by Steven Staver. Music by Dan Ring. Special thanks to all the Saturday Morning Media Patreon patrons who make this content possible. And a special mention to those who supported the producer level, including Dorothy Baciocco, Eve Cunning, Kathy Crawford, Tony Urbano, David Akers, Jamie Donmeyer, and Vicky Sebring. To find out more about becoming a patron, visit patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media. This episode is copyright 2021 Saturday Morning Media, Grant Baciocco executive producer, all rights reserved. www.saturdaymorningmedia.com. You've been listening to Saturday Morning Media. Stay tuned, we'll be right back.